Amber Idle. I'm the Washington State veterinarian, and I'm here with Dr. Kevin Snefik with WSU Waddle. And we're here to give you the weekly update on HPAI in both poultry and in livestock here in the United States, and then give you any updates about what's going on here in Washington. Today is May 20th, so everything we cover today will be an update from what we've heard last week. And as we get new information this week, we'll be preparing our update for next week. And we'll continue to do this as long as we get information that we feel like is new and that might be helpful to all of you. Certainly, you can reach out to us with any additional questions or comments you have during the week, because we know this is an evolving situation and we're constantly getting new information. So last week we did meet with our local health jurisdictions, which was just a great opportunity for us to connect with our partners there. And they did ask, what does the dairy industry look like in Washington? And I thought, what, that's a great question, and it's something that would be important to update you on today. So this is from the NASS statistics, and we're basically looking at about 419 dairies in Washington state. And we have about 257,000 milking cows. And the top 5 counties here in Washington include Whatcom, Benton, Franklin, Klickitat, and Yakima counties. And so it just kind of helps people understand where the dairies are. So, that you understand if you're in that area, that you might be at higher risk or something to be looking out for. Of course, this approach with HPAI response from the beginning has been a One Health approach. And this is really being handled at the federal level, more so than the state level. But the states are trying to help drive some of that federal policy, but we're certainly working closely with USDA, CDC, FDA, HHS, and Wildlife Services in order to complete this response. So this is just going to give you a quick overview of what's happening in the United States with poultry. As you know, since the beginning of this outbreak about 2.5 years ago, we've had 48 affected states and 1,200 confirmed premises. And right now we have a couple surveillance zones. So these are control or surveillance zones that were put into place prior than the previous week. So they aren't active. That means they've been depopulated. But we do have a few new ones in the last week, and that was both Idaho and Michigan had a few detections of HPAI. In Idaho, it was backyard flock, and in Michigan, it was poultry, but it was a relatively small flock from what I could see. And then this has been the last 30 days. So the last slide was in the last 7 days. This slide is reflective of detections in the last 30 days. We've had 4 commercial flocks, 7 backyard flocks. And so those California there and Idaho, you'll see in the last 30 days, and those are the ones we probably would be most concerned about. Those were both backyard flocks, or all 3 of those, I should say, 2 in Idaho and 1 in California. And you can see that nationally, this trend for HPAI detections by year is staying pretty consistent with what it looked like last year. And I think we'll continue to expect to see a lull in HPAI detections in commercial flocks and hopefully backyard flocks through the summer as birds have kind of made their way through the state and headed up to Alaska. In Washington, we still have not had any new detections of HPAI in backyard or commercial flocks since December, so nothing new to report there. And then as far as HPAI detections in wild birds, you can see this is the total number since 2022. So this is kind of that ongoing surveillance they're doing. But what they've really seen in the last year is that we're seeing a lower prevalence of HPAI in wild birds. And you can see in the last 30 days, here are the number of detections by state. So we've just had 1 there in Idaho, but obviously there's more than 1 bird out there that has the virus. It just seems like we're not seeing as many birds, or we're not seeing those mass mortality events that we've seen in other years. So that's good. That's a really good thing. In wild carnivores, we've seen mostly detections in red fox, and those have been in New York and in Michigan. We haven't seen anything new here in Washington for the last 3 or 4 months now, and I think our most recent detections were in skunks and a bobcat. Last fall, we had some seals and some Caspian terns, but we have not had any reports in the recent last few months. All right, and then what we're dealing with HPAI and dairy cattle, just a quick update on that as well. As you know, we've had 9 states. The same 9 states have been impacted. But from like the last 30 days, some of these states haven't had any new detections. So South Dakota, Kansas, New Mexico, North Carolina, and Ohio, you'll see they've changed the color on those states as as more time passes by. We're really trying to focus on those states that are still dealing with active infections. So I know Idaho had some new cases this week, as well as Michigan. I believe Colorado had an additional detection as well, and Texas. So you can find those on the HPAI and livestock website, but those 4 states are continuing to deal with kind of that lateral spread of disease from farm to farm. And I also wanted to just remind everybody that it's important to have denominators because it's concerning. We've had 51 premises with detections. And actually, I have another slide. I think this might not be the most updated slide. So I apologize for that. And I'll put it in the chat when Dr. Snekvik is giving his update. But I do want to mention that we have 32,000 dairies in the United States. And so even with the 51 detections that we've had, it's a pretty low number overall. So about a 0.001% of total herds infected in the United States. Here are the most recent detections in the last week. You can see the number of animals in each herd. So Idaho here has one of the biggest herds at 11,000, but they certainly range. And, as small of a herd as Michigan is 400. Seems like Michigan's continuing to battle that lateral spread, but they certainly have some great data coming out of that state. They're doing some great epidemiology work, and hopefully we'll get to see some of more results than what we presented last week. Here's just kind of the epidemiological curve and what we're seeing. So despite the federal order being put into place in around April 28th, we've had 11 detections since that time with that pre-movement testing. So we haven't captured too many more herds, but we are, I think, finding more through trace outs and finding that lateral spread rather than those animals that are moving across state lines. So the federal order, as you know, it's been in place now for several weeks. Nothing's changed too much with that order. So we're continuing to do the pre-movement testing where it's been mandated. The only thing that was new, and I also presented this last week, is that USDA came out and said, hey, we're going to financially support infected herds. So any herds once become infected and once they have a confirmed diagnosis, there's several ways that USDA is prepared to help them, everything from heat treating milk to paying for biosecurity planning to offsetting shipping and laboratory costs, compensating veterinarians, and anything that they can do to kind of try to stop that transmission. Because really, USDA's goal is to eradicate HPAI from dairy cattle herd in the United States. And so they're going to continue to push forward with this program. They're going to continue to try to incentivize this program and even try to figure out ways to pay for lost milk production by expanding the ELAP program. So we may continue to see things from USDA for trying to support producers so they don't go out of business. I'm not going to go over this slide in any amount of detail, but this was a really nice flow chart that Dr. Bruce Hutton from our group put together, mostly to support our livestock markets and harvest facilities so they understand exactly what's required based on that federal order for animals moving in from in-state versus out-of-state. We did hear from Dr. Pruitt on Friday that states can agree to something a little bit different for animals moving to slaughter, even if they're going through a livestock market. Right now, those animals are required to be tested if they're coming into a livestock market from out of state. But we are working with Oregon and Idaho to see if there's any agreements that we need to make sure that we're not disrupting continuity of business for our producers, and see if we can make that easy, but also stay in compliance with the federal order to make sure those animals actually make it to slaughter channels, because that's the concern. Certainly, we're keeping an eye on this because everyone has continued to be concerned about the spillover event. To date, we haven't seen any spillover into pigs, thank goodness, and I know there's been a lot of work done in the swine industry. We also have not had any more cases in humans, just the single farm worker in Texas. And last week, Dr. Snekvik presented on the whole genomic sequencing, outlining kind of where the humans fit in and how they look like they might be on a phylogenetically separate branch than the cattle. So we're continuing to track that and monitor that. And as I've presented in other times, we do have this whole USGAID. I think it's a whole genomic sequencing database that's out there with all the sequences from all over the world. So if you're really interested in that, you can certainly look at that and you can ask us and we can get you there if you want to see more. I don't have too much to update you on this other than that we are continuing to work with the Department of Health. We do meet with them every week to talk about our response, anything new. And CDC did come out and wanted to make sure that everybody, all farm workers, poultry and dairy, are provided with any of the personal protective equipment that they might need or want. And so we are working very closely with our local public health jurisdictions to figure out that process and what that should look like. And we also, again, have the same fact sheet that we put together several weeks ago with Department of Health in Spanish and in English outlining PPE for farm workers. So as far as FDA, nothing's really new from FDA, although they did come out and publish the results of their meat study. So they took some meat, they infected it with the H5N1, and they cooked it at the normal temperatures that you would normally cook ground beef. So the virus was inactivated at both 145 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's like a medium burger and a pretty well done burger. And they said it was pretty even effective against a very rare burger. Wasn't 100%, but it was pretty effective. So that's good. They're continuing to do routine surveillance in the 11th largest slaughter facilities in the United States that captures or represents about 60% of all animals that are slaughtered in the US, at least on the cattle side. And they are selecting those cull dairy cows. So those are cows that are being condemned for other reasons. So they would be the highest risk population and still have not found additional positives either in muscle or lung tissue. And so we're feeling really good about that the meat is safe and continues to be safe. I did want to mention real quick, because one update is I did hear that there were some private labs maybe doing some of their own commercial milk testing in the state. I just wanted to remind everyone that the federal order does require a reporting of all influenza A non-negative tests or positive tests. So those are reportable. So if you're doing that for an academic reason or just for fun, you still need to report that to us. And if you're doing that, let me know and I'll work with you on how to do that. But we don't anticipate that we're going to get any positives here in Washington State, at least not Washington origin milk. And also just remember that the viral particles that you can pick up on PCR have been shown to be inactivated by FDA. So last week at our National Assembly meeting, we had a really, really amazing report from Dr. Magstad at Iowa State. This is unpublished work, so I just wanted to let folks know I'm not putting this up here to say, hey, go out and share all this. It's more like I just want folks to understand that there are a lot of people working on this issue right now. We're all starving and craving more information about HPAI and cattle, and he did a really, really nice study on some banked milk samples that were frozen, and they took these samples over time from an affected herd so they could go back retroactively from the time that the cows were seen to be sick. So that's that black line in the middle is day 0. So that's the day animals became clinically ill. And what he showed is in that first graph is that they were already seeing evidence of HPAI in the milk up to 2 weeks prior. And those CT values really dropped out and really bottomed out around day 4 or 5. And that's also when the cows were most clinically ill. So the highest number of animals in the herd were showing illness when the CT values were the lowest, which is what we would expect. But what's been really nice to see, at least in his small study, is that at about 3-4 weeks, those cows completely recovered. So no more signs of illness. And also those CT values in the milk leveled out to 38 or above, which is negative and considered to be free. So that's great. It's great to see that these animals and these herds can clear the infection so that they can move on for continuity of business. That's super important to us. And this is just very early work, very preliminary work, and there's more work to be done. But I just wanted to share it because I thought it was kind of a sense of relief that yes, we can eradicate HPAI from the dairy herd in the US. That is doable. We can do this. And then the second thing he showed, which was also interesting, was just it also showed those CT values again. So you're seeing that orange line that's showing the CT value, and then also showing that there's an antibody response. So once those animals recover, what you're seeing down here is this antibody test or this SN ratio, which actually shows that the animal has developed an antibody to HPAI, which is also good news. This means that hopefully they're less likely to become reinfected, but I don't want to make any like strong conclusions here because this is early work, preliminary work, but I think it's also just good to like learn something new and see that yes, cows can recover from this, cows can develop immunity. So that's a really good thing. I was just real quick going to talk about our response if we do get a confirmed case of bovine or HPAI in dairy cattle here in Washington State. First of all, we don't have any cases. Just want to make sure I reiterate that. We have no cases. And so right now we're just here giving you updates, monitoring the situation on a national level, but want to remind you that we are on the ready. We are doing trace in and trace outs for every health certificate from out-of-state cattle or out-of-state lactating dairy animals. We are tracking those, tracing those. Dr. Bruce Hutton has actually been personally calling all of those to make sure they don't have any clinical signs, to make sure they understand about isolation and risk and what to watch for, so that we're really keeping a close eye on those, but we really don't have that many imports. So that's really good news for us, because it sure seems like the way this virus is being transmitted is by moving infected cattle, and we really don't do that much here in Washington, so that's really good for us. Most of our lactating animals, those animals calve on farm, and then they stay on farm for the course of their life. So that's really good for us from a risk perspective. So if we do get an infection, though, we are going to stand up an IMT. So we'll be working with our partners at Department of Health, Emergency Management, Waddle with Dr. Kevin Snekvik here on the call, as well as Wildlife Services, just to make sure we're all looped in and we're all doing this right. We'll be placing a quarantine on those animals, and we'll be permitting animals to move to slaughter. And then we'll be testing those cattle based on the federal order every 30 days until we get negative status, so that we can release that quarantine. So again, we're using our animal disease traceability program right now to trace those animals, so we know exactly where they're going. And we're also able to capture that tag number at slaughter. So anything that goes to slaughter here in the state, we do have traceability on those animals, so we know where they came from, and we know when they are no longer in the system. So that's a good thing. There's still so much work to do on the epidemiology on HPAI and dairy cattle. We still don't really understand the transmission mechanisms, but on all of those positive dairies, those 51 dairies, they're working very, very hard to collect the epidemiological data that we need to be able to better understand how it's being transmitted and how to break those transmission cycles. We're just doing a lot of information sharing right now. So a lot of the information, I want to thank the folks that have been part of putting these updates together. So all the slides I'm showing you are not mine. They are not my information. They are from USDA, they are from CDC, they are from FDA, they're from all of our partners out there. And we're trying to do the best we can to get all the information that we get every week at these national level meetings, whether that's at the veterinary services level, or with that, if that's with the Secretary of Agriculture or Secretary Bill Sachs, we've been doing a weekly update. We've also been participating in CDC calls, and all of that information is being funneled out to our partners here in Washington State, and then now on to you through this weekly webinar. Also continuing to work with the Bovine Issues Working Group to stay apprised of the situation and get our information out to industry as much as we can. So I want to continue to thank them for their efforts, as well as all of our other partners here in Washington State, including WSVMA and our Emergency Management Group, and Aaron Coyle, who's in our Emergency Management Program here at WSDA, just doing an awesome job, as well as WSU Extension, and of course, my friend, Dr. Kevin Snekvik, who is on the call now. And I'm going to hand it off to him. Everyone is fully aware of the USDA update pages, as well as every week I just try to put a quick plug in for mental health resources for our producers who are continuing to struggle. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and have Dr. Snekvik give you some updates on numbers, testing numbers. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. So just from the laboratory perspective, so the Wash Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory, Dr. Kevin Snekvik, so Executive Director. And just to give you a heads up on the USDA National Animal Health Laboratory Network. So this is our network of laboratories across the United States. As you can see on the screen here on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side is the activation of that network. So remember, the network is made up of over 60 laboratories across the United States. So some states, like in Washington, we're privileged to have 2 laboratories. So that's where the extra number above 50 comes from. But for what you can see here, though, on the right-hand side of that network is fully lit up. All those green triangles are laboratories that have been activated for the high-path avian influenza outbreak. That's actually been going on for 2 years now. And you can see that they're detecting commercial and backyard flocks, as well as wild bird testing like we do here at Waddle, and mammals, and even into the dairy cattle that we've just talked about. So just a quick slide here to kind of show you the network and how it is up and running and activated and generating all that data that Dr. Idle has talked about here. So next slide, just to touch on what we've been doing here at the diagnostic lab. So just on the dairy cattle side, so lactating dairy cattle, we're up to 273 samples that we've tested over the last approximately a month, so 4 weeks. And just to shout out again that Washington, all of our testing samples have been negative, so not detected. So that is a good thing on our front. So Washington is staying definitely on the green side of things as far as movement testing. But we are working with our partners in Idaho and other states since the NOLM lab here, Waddle is our tier 1 laboratory for the Pacific Northwest. So we are working across multiple states and responding to their needs as well. So, and just as what Dr. Idle mentioned, as we track some of these herds that have been positive, what we do see is a CT level, meaning the amount of virus that is in samples increases. So that means that there's reducing amounts of virus in there. So what our goal is to get these herds negative and back into normal production as soon as possible. Likewise, we've been working with our Department of Health colleagues in regards to other concerns as far as cats and other testing. We are continuing to test across all species that need to be tested. So I'll put that out there, and I'll leave that at that. As always, the Waddle is here for your needs. We have a web page that if you have questions, you can check out information there, and obviously reach out to us via email or phone, which is listed on that web page. And I will shoot it back to you, Amber. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, well, I think that's up for our update this week. Like I said, we'll continue to update if something comes up, or if we do get a detection in Washington State, we will do an update, within 24 hours. We're gonna have to get our ducks in a row, but we will certainly update this group as quickly as we can by video update and let you know what's going on so that you're apprised of the situation. So thanks for your time. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks.